Greetings to everyone connected with us today. My name is Manan Suri, and I take immense pleasure in welcoming all of you on behalf of the Debating Society of Netaji Subhash University of Technology to the PD Premier Debate. Debating is not just about the spar of words, but it is about the culmination of ideas. With the PD Premier Debate, we aim to show you just that through a format that is new yet exciting. I would like to invite our accomplished PD directors, Targeti Kumar and Arpan Moitra, to give you a glimpse to the magical world of parliamentary debates.
Hi everyone, I'm Arpan Moitra, and with me I have Pragati Kumar. We both are serving as the directors for the Parliamentary Debating Department of DEPSOC and SUT. We welcome you all to this PD Premier session and are extremely excited to introduce you to this amazing format we call the Parliamentary Debating format. But before we delve into the nitty-gritties of the format itself, I want to tell you why this parliamentary debating is the thing for you. Well, multiple reasons for that. Number one, parliamentary debating helps you evolve effortlessly and organically into this person who is confident, well spoken, and intellectually aware about the things happening around them. And trust me when I say this will help you in all walks of life. Parliamentary debating is the hottest thing right now. If not the hottest, definitely one of the hottest debating formats, both here as well as abroad. So, something you need to look out for because this format is extremely approachable, fun, fair, and definitely rewarding. Number three, parliamentary debating gives you an escape from your daily mundane lives to an environment where you can have conversations and discussions about things extending well and above your daily average conversations, which will educate you about a lot of things. Number fourth, parliamentary debating comes with no prerequisites whatsoever. So, no matter you have debated early or not, you can do well in parliamentary debating. You don't need a good extensive vocabulary, you don't need a silver tongue. All you need is a positive attitude and the willingness to learn, and you can do amazing. I can keep going on and on for I don't know how long, but I think it's in the best interest of time to keep it till here. Pragati will further explain you about the intricacies of parliamentary debating. Till then, bye bye. Over to you, Pragati.
Hello everyone, I'm Targeti Kumar and I'm the PD director along with Arpan Moitra, who I'm sure has gotten all of you all hyped by now by pointing out just how many advantages there are for you to get associated with a department like PD. So I'll be walking you through the specificities of what is it that actually makes PD as a format so approachable, as Arpan correctly pointed out. So you can be participating in teams of 2 or 3 as a debater, and the motions that you debate upon have themes which can vary from feminism to LGBTQIA rights, international relations, governance policies, refugee issues, and whatnot. But are you expected to have knowledge about all of these issues prior to the debates? Well, as Arpan pointed out, you don't. So, how does that pan out? So, for most of the motions, you're given a context in which all the facts that you need to have regarding that motion are provided so that there's a level playing field for everyone, and the debaters are expected to draw logical conclusions from that given context and, well, fight to win. But who decides who the winner is? That is the job of an adjudicator. People can participate as adjudicators, and their main role would be to decide who the winner is after carefully observing all of the speeches, and then they have to give their verdict, justify it, and guess what? These adjudicators are marked as well. By whom? By the debaters. That's right. The debaters get to decide whether they are satisfied with the verdict given by the adjudicators or not. That is how PD ensures a level playing field at all stages of their proceedings. So every rule attempts at making everybody feel like they're in a very rational and logical environment. So I can go on and on sing sagas about how PD is a wonderful format to debate in and how it ensures that there's equality for everyone and there's a logical proceeding to every rule. But due to the time constraint, I'll cut short my speech for now, and I hope to see you all join our department very soon. Over to you, Kushi. Thank you so much.
We'd like you to familiarize yourselves with the format of the PD before we move on to the real debate. In a PD, there are two sides, one supporting the motion and the other opposing it, and namely referred to as the proposition or the government side and the opposition. So there are three speakers on each side. The debate begins with the first speaker from the prop side, followed by the first speaker from the opposition side, and the debate moves on. People can also engage in the debate as judges, which makes PD most unique and fun form of debating. After the discussion, these judges have to have must vote for a side and explain their decision to the speakers based on the reasons presented during the debate. So over to Rishi to explain the motion now. Thank you.
So let's talk about today's debate. So in today's debate, every speaker will be giving a speech of 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And for today's debate, the motion is this House regrets the culture of Indian students from reputed institutions to leave India for higher studies or employment after undergrad. And for this motion, I will be giving a context also. So the process of subsidization refers to the government paying for a portion of something with public or taxpayer money. Most of reputed educational institutions in India, like AIIMS, IIT, are highly subsidized to make education more accessible to all parts of the society. Without any further delay, now I would like to invite PM to give their speech. The floor is yours.
Hello and a warm welcome to the panel and my fellow debaters. My name is Sawmee, and as the first speaker in this debate, I'll be characterizing the motion for this debate for you and telling you why our side of the House regrets the enormous brain drain we see across the nation. Panel, we believe that reputed institutions like IITs, AIIMS, NITs, and so on, which are the main focus of this debate, have some characteristic qualities which perhaps makes this motion relevant and even more regrettable. Firstly, these are institutions that are heavily subsidized by the government. That is, they witness a huge amount of investment in the form of capital, in the form of funding being poured into these institutions, primarily coming from the taxpayers' money. And we believe that it's also worthwhile to reiterate the fact that one of the primary goals of the taxation system is to aid the nation building efforts and be the bedrock for ushering in development and ensuring a secure future for the citizens. If I, as a taxpayer, am giving a certain chunk of my income or my salary to the government, I'm doing it in an expectance of return of something, which can be a secure future for my nation, a better standard of living, and so on. And essentially, I'm supposed to be the beneficiary of the taxpayer money directly or indirectly. It's also worthwhile to mention that these reputed institutions are the ones that are accessible to everyone. They have the least socioeconomic barriers for admission, they have the best facilities and the best research work being done, and are supposed to be at the frontier of innovation and bringing in change. And this is what makes the enormous brain drain we witness even all the more regrettable. Why? Because you have exactly the people who can do that, people who can be at the frontier of change, leaving the country for greener pastures abroad. You have exactly the brilliant minds in these institutions who could go on to become future CEOs and entrepreneurs and innovators, leaving the nation, and you essentially create a situation where perhaps the people who can bring in the most impact leave. This is something that we regret. This is something that we regret because it's exactly the polar opposite of what ideally should happen. We regret it because this culture has changed the narrative. It has changed the narrative of IITs being the bedrock of nation building to IITs being feeder institutes for American institutes and American corporations, for example. We regret it because it goes against the long-term goal of a developing nation like India, which is to challenge the global hegemony and come at least on par with, if not better, than the developed nations. How? Because understand that there is already a global hegemony that's established. You already have the developed Western nations dominating the hierarchy in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, and research by the virtue of better facilities and perhaps more capital. And these are exactly the things that aid the nation building efforts and usher in development. Now, we accept the fact that there are problems in India. We agree that the developed nations maybe have a better standard of living and better infrastructure. But as long as you have the people who can bring in exactly that development, go ahead.
Since you agree that India doesn't have the best environment and facilities for education, how else will students get the resources to develop India if they then don't go abroad?
Right. Thanks for your question. Now, you have to understand the fact that whatever amount of development a nation has to usher in has to come from within itself because that's the only way that it can itself become developed. Now, for example, if India wants to usher in development in terms of scientific innovation and research, it has to come from within India. It has to come from Indian institutions. It has to come from IITs and IISc and not MIT. We cannot imagine a situation where second-hand innovation from developed countries form the bedrock for India's development because that will be a highly dependent relationship where you're essentially relying on other countries for your own development. So whatever development we need has to come from within. And when you have the people who can bring in exactly that development and exactly that change, leave, you're doing nothing to change the position in your hierarchy. You're introducing no room for change and you're essentially essentially accept India's position in the hierarchy as a feeder nation for the developed nations, and this is something that we regret, very proud to propose.
The culture of Indian students from reputed institutions leaving India after undergrad. Panel, this house is set in India, which is a developing nation, and by virtue of this fact, two things. First, the facilities such as research laboratories and academic institutions in India are not at par with those present abroad in developed nations such as the United States of America. Secondly, we also believe that institutions abroad have a better academic atmosphere because of the peer group in these institutions being A, more socially aware and cognizant of a varied spectrum of issues. For example, LGBTQ rights are still considered taboo in some parts of India and are not openly talked about as much as they should. And we believe that exposure to this kind of an atmosphere charges the thought process of students coming in and studying abroad from developing nations, right? And B, this peer group abroad consists of a very diverse student pool with students from different nationalities and backgrounds. And this introduces you to new perspectives and helps in making you a well rounded and open minded individual. Panel, education is not one dimensional, right? The purpose of education is not merely to gain knowledge, but also to hone your personality. And with this characterization set forth, the opposition does not regret the culture of Indian students from reputed institutions leaving India for higher studies or employment after undergrad, because these are the creme de la creme of Indian academia. These students have completed their undergraduate studies from the best institutions India has to offer. And when they pursue higher education abroad, they gain an unparalleled level of knowledge and exposure, which in turn enhances the intellectual capital of India when they return. And why does opposition believe that it is extremely likely that many of these students return to India after pursuing their higher studies abroad? A, they have families and homes based in India, which in itself is a huge incentive for anyone to settle in the long run in their home nation. And B, living in foreign countries requires these students to acclimatize themselves with foreign culture, climate, cuisines, and adapt to an entirely different way of living, which in itself is very, very difficult. Therefore, panel, we tell you that many of these students, after completing their higher education abroad, eventually settle back in India and add to the intellectual capital of our nation and aid in the long term development of the nation, right? Because students are the one of the most important resources for a nation, and education is a major catalyst for long term change and development. And we have notable examples to support our cause. For example, Raghuram Rajan, who did his PhD from MIT, Ujit Patel, who is an MPhil from Oxford and doctorate from Yale, both of whom settled in India eventually and served as the directors of the RBI and immensely contributed to the Indian economy and therefore to the Indian development. And on that note, extremely, extremely proud to oppose. Thank you.
Panel opposition in their paradigm, they come and tell you that students who leave India for higher education, they will come back after completion of their education. But this is something that won't happen. They themselves have established to you that students leave India and they go and live in those countries because they have more resources and more opportunities. They have higher standards of living than India. Now, having said that, the propensity that these students will come back to India after completion of their education is very less. Rather, they are likely to settle abroad. Secondly, one major aspect of the motion that the opposition is missing in this case is the students who leave country for employment opportunities. Reputed institutes like IITs, IIMs, and AIIMS, they provide promising job opportunities with great salaries. Still, these students choose to live in the developed nations. Now, this is essentially creating a situation where Indian taxpayers they are funding brain drain, which is benefiting the foreign countries, no doubt, but this is hampering the development of our very own nation. If this culture continues, if these talented young individuals continue to leave our country and settle abroad, then how will India develop as a nation? How will we improve our position in the global picture? These are the essential questions that we raise in this debate, and these questions remain unanswered by the opposition. These premier institutions they are subsidized by the government so that they can provide quality training and education to students coming from various sections of the society. These students have taken a lot from their nation, and now it becomes their moral responsibility to give back to the nation in some way or the other. This can only happen when these students live in India, when they work in India. Consider the example of Sachin Bansal. He was the co-founder of Flipkart. He is a former IITian who is living in India and is working as an Indian entrepreneur. We need more people like him. This is the sort of culture that we want to promote. When these students will live in India, and when these students will work in India, then they will contribute to the Indian economy. Then they will create more employment for fellow Indians, and this will lead to development of India in the long run. This will make India a developed nation. One more major disadvantage that this culture is having is that it is creating a negative environment for those students who wish to live in India after their undergraduation. When they will see that most of their peers are going abroad for either pursuing higher education or for taking a job, then they will feel that they are taking a wrong decision to stay in India, maybe, or they will feel that there aren't enough career opportunities available in India. So this is creating a negative environment for them. Rather, these educational institutions should act as ideals. They should act as role models for rest of those institutions in India and set examples for them. But this isn't happening in the opposition's paradigm. So this is the reason why this culture is deeply regretted. Really proud to propose.
The proposition's major talking point during this debate seems to be that the taxpayers' money being used to support the students is not helping the country, as the students are going abroad and not contributing to the country's development. Now, I will first talk about the social contract between the government and the citizens. The government is supposed to use the money paid as taxes to provide basic facilities like healthcare, security, and education. It is not the responsibility of the citizens to give back to the country for these services, since it is just the citizens' money being used for the benefit of the citizens. So, the students going abroad for further education or employment is not a betrayal as the proposition paints it to be. Further, Charu mentioned in her speech that based on the benefits of going abroad, it is likely that people who go abroad never return, and this hampers the country's development. I would like to point out that if there are benefits to going abroad, there are some serious drawbacks as well. Take, for example, the xenophobic sentiments prevalent in the US today. Note that Donald Trump's entire presidential campaign was based upon providing more jobs to Native Americans. And once he became the president, he reduced the number of work visas given to Indian immigrants. Also, consider the serious incidents of racial violence, and you realize that life is not entirely comfortable abroad, whether it be the US or it be Europe. Also, we are talking about students who spent their childhood in India. So no matter how much they get acclimatized to the conditions abroad, how much time they spend there, like learning the culture or like getting accustomed to the cuisine or the weather or anything else of that sort, they will feel more comfortable in India, as a lot of their friends and their families are in India. Hence, they are very likely to return. Finally, I would like to make another argument to show that brain drain is not as undesirable as the proposition wants us to believe. If the people who go abroad do well there, then it enhances the country's image across the world. Remember that the CEO of Microsoft is Satya Nadella and the CEO of Google is Sundar Pichai, and both of them are of Indian origin. And these are just two of many other examples that I could give in this regard. This not only makes it easier for Indian immigrants to be accepted more easily across the globe, also this increases the amount of interest that India gets from other countries. And so new and existing businesses in India are more likely to get foreign investments, whether it be like a big established company like Reliance, or it be a newer startup. Thus, students going abroad for further education and employment creates more opportunities for the country. Hence, brain drain should not be regretted. I am very proud to oppose, and I rest my case.
Panel, besides the baseless assertions and incorrigible squirreling of the case, we receive literally nothing from the side opposition. 3 points hinged in this entire debate, and on all those three metrics, we take this debate. Let me list them out for you. One, taxpayers and their betrayal. Panel, we tell you how hard earned money of taxpayers is spent like water on these creme de la creme students. These students are a very small minority, a handful of students on whom we spend thousands and thousands of crores just to provide them world class education on a very nominal fee. And once their education is completed, what do these students do? Instead of abiding by their moral duty to do good for the nation, these students go to West and aid in development of those nations. which is basically like my all the benefit of my taxpayers' money is being accrued by these Western nations, which is simply like I am paying my tax directly to Washington DC, and there has been no engagement at this point by side opposition at all as of now. Second point, panel, better employment. They say that they are paid more in foreign countries and yada yada something on those lines. But panel, that is simply false. We tell you that these students who are students of premier institutions will get high paying and high living standards in India itself because, well, they are from premier institutions. They are the cream of our country. So they are going to get high paying jobs, high living standards regardless of the country they live in. The real reason for them leaving India is not high pay. Rather, panel, that is the internalized inferiority complex that we Indian tend to have at this moment in history, which is which is the segue to my third point, that is internalized inferiority and development. In the global hegemony panel, India in the longer run remains a very developing nation as it is now in their paradigm, which happens for two reasons. Because one, the person who was supposed to change India's status from a developing to a developed nation, the person who we expected to become a leader in industry, a leader in science, a leader in any other facet of economy, is now simply going and aiding for the development of Western nations. Because that person who had the choice to stay in India and work for our development now simply is going and becoming a cog in the big Western machine. The second reason, panel, is the perception. The perception that India will always remain choice. Because people who have a choice, who actually can choose to stay in India or go abroad, simply leaving India. The pursue the jobs in India, the people who actually develop India are people who are say second class or class or below the cream of our nation. So basically, people who have a choice are leaving India, and people who don't have a choice are the ones who are left in India. So basically, this entire perception of the world remains same, that India will always be the second choice. India is always the choice of people who simply can't leave it. That hurts our nation in the long run. On those 3 points, panel, the motion stands very firmly in my opinion. And these students, panel, these students leaving our nation, in our humble opinion, is can be said akin to a child leaving their parent. After that parent nurtures that child for with their money, with their resources, and that child is simply leaving the parent in their time of need, which we find both ethically and morally abhorrent. Thank you, panel. Very, very proud to propose.
Apart from what government tries to pass off at legitimate argumentation in the form of some sort of an inferiority complex, which you should intuitively realize is just simply untrue, government tells you two things in this debate, right? They tell you first that there's a global power hegemony, and somehow like eradicating this culture of people going out to get better education, better skills, and better facilities is going to somehow solve this power hegemony. We don't understand that, but sure, we'll engage on it. And second, they tell you that essentially it's somehow the taxpayers that should get some sort of benefit, and essentially there's some sort of moral responsibility that is placed upon the students to not go out and live their lives, essentially, right? Let's engage on both of those things. First of all, global power hegemony, right? We agree with their basic premise. We agree that India is a developing nation and there are developed nations within the world. We believe that yes, the US has better facilities, the US has better education, and has a better environment conducive to more holistic learning and like development of skills in general, right? At that point, there's only one thing and one binary in this debate. That is to say, we agree that these people are going out, right? We agree that they're getting better education outside, right? See, the only thing that matters then in this debate is whether or not they come back to India and help India become developed, right? Government says that that doesn't happen, and they give you one argument and only one argument as to why it doesn't happen. They tell you that people won't come back essentially just because they'll get better pay and they'll get a better situation. They don't elaborate further, and that's the only sort of reasoning we get as to why people are going to stay outside, right? Three responses to this argument, two of which have already made, but I'll repeat them for you anyway. First of all, Akshata tells you that essentially these people have traditional ties, right? There's going to be a traditional and cultural shock when they go to the US, when they adapt to different forms of cuisine, when they adapt to different cultures, and essentially they'll want familiarity, which means that after a point where they've gained better skills, they're going to come back they're going to come back to India and help India in the long run, right? Charu says that that's not true because we're not focusing on employment. Completely evading the argument, but sure, we'll engage on employment too. Again, Rishabh replies here and he tells you about xenophobia. He tells you about racism and he tells you about how the world that government tries to paint for you like a completely rosy picture is not something that exists, right? It's a xenophobic, it's a racist world out there in these sort of developed nations, which again will incentivize these Indians to come back home and help our own country, which again leads to a more developed nations, right? Both opposition and government want a better developed India. The difference here is we actually give you a developed India where government only speaks of it, right? But further, we have another response to it, and that is to say that government very essentially in their case, and this includes the second idea of the moral responsibility being upon the students, is that they don't take the students' perspective themselves into account. That is to say, these students have been born and bred in India, right? They're people who have spent 20 years of their lives in India. They love this country, they care about this country. At that point in time, you have to understand that they themselves have some sort of incentive and motivation to come back to this country, right? Regardless of there being some sort of moral obligation on them, which we believe doesn't exist to the concept of a social contract that has been explained by Rishabh. Even then, right, we believe that they're going to go ahead, even if there is some moral obligation upon them, we believe that they're going to go ahead and fulfill this moral obligation by coming back to India because of the incentive structures that we've just described to you. That is why we don't regret this motion. We believe that India is a better developed country in our world. Thank you. Proud to oppose.
With that, we come to conclusion of what was a very, very interesting discourse. I thank you all for participating in the event. We really appreciate the efforts. So if you have any doubts, if you want to discuss anything regarding the debate with the participants, you're welcome to do so. For that, you can move over to DepSoc NSUT 25 Discord server. We'll be having a discussion there on the informal debate channel. All our participants will be present there and will be happy to answer all your doubts. If you want to type your doubts via chat, you can also use our WhatsApp. We will be really active there and we'll be answering all your doubts. Once again, thank you so much for attending the event. We really appreciate the efforts.